It's fair to say that one of the biggest issues with Battlefield 5 over the past few months has been performance. Not everyone has big issues, but a lot of players have been experiencing some really frustrating performance problems. What makes it worse is that this spans over a vast amount of different PC specifications and setups. People are running the game fine on medium spec machines, while others running 2080 Ti's are having regular issues. There have been some improvements recently though, and it's worth pointing out that it's not all Battlefield's fault. Windows 10 doesn't help in a lot of respects, but the biggest problem is CPU. Battlefield loves your CPU. They're best friends. Now, I wanted to make this video because I've been messing around and I've changed an awful lot of settings over the past few weeks to try and get my game running on PC as well as possible, and I wanted to share those with you, some of the tips and tricks and things that I do to get the game as stutter free as possible. I will say that this might not work for everyone, it might not work for you. It's not a one-stop fits all situation. It may not magically make your game run better because we all run different setups, but I'm confident that if you do the steps that I'm going to walk you through, you should definitely see an improvement in performance. First of all, this is really basic, but you may not realize how much of a difference it makes. Before you load up the game, close every single program that you don't need on your PC, especially any program that uses a lot of CPU. I had a program, for example, running that controlled the lights on my motherboard and other parts of my PC, and I found that it was using almost 10%. It's not a lot, but given how hungry Battlefield 5 actually is, that can make a big difference. Google Chrome tends to take up a lot of resources too, so I always close that before I go into game. So don't just go into Task Manager and close down things willy-nilly that you don't know about, but close down anything that you know you don't need running at the time. If you don't want to be messing around with any of your programs though, you may want to consider turning game mode on. Anything like game bar or game mode when it comes to Windows is frowned upon usually, and okay, there are some good reasons for that. It's never really worked all that well until recently. If you've got the latest Windows updates, game mode can actually make a difference, so it could be worth turning game mode on, or at least trying it. The way Windows works is that each program on your computer has a different priority, low, medium, high, etc. When you have multiple programs running, as most people do, even if you don't realize it, Windows determines what program needs what when it comes to processing power. Game mode, in theory, is just more efficient at doing this by making a more consistent experience by altering the allocation of hardware resources when a game is running. Now in the past, it's been worse typically for some people when using game mode, so I would advise turning it on, trying it out and seeing if it helps. If not, well, you can always just pop it back off. Depending on what version of Windows you're running and what hardware you have, I think will dictate if you'll see a benefit or not. The next step is to clear your DirectX cache. Go to your computer and then C drive, right click, go to properties and then hit disk cleanup. From here, we want to select the DirectX cache. Deselect everything other than the DirectX shader cache and then hit clean up system files. These files are used to speed up application load times, but when you delete them, they will be regenerated. And I've actually started doing this every time there's a Battlefield update. It's probably overkill, but the stuttering became quite bad for me at times, so I just got into the habit of doing this. Now it goes without saying that if you want the best performance, you should be using the latest drivers for your hardware. And if that hardware happens to be one of the latest NVIDIA graphics cards, then there are some extra benefits to utilizing the latest drivers, and that's something called low latency mode. This isn't just a Battlefield thing, but it can help across multiple games. If you have an NVIDIA card, head into the NVIDIA control panel and set the latency to low or ultra. The way that this works is relatively complicated, but it's essentially all about how many frames your graphics card is queuing before sending them to you. The NVIDIA control panel has had a setting for decades called maximum pre-rendered frames, and that allowed you to keep the maximum amount of frames in the queue down. This feature expands on that. With ultra low latency mode, frames are sent into the graphics card queue right before the GPU needs them, which they say reduces latency by around 33%. That thing is going to help you a lot with the way that the mouse feels in a lot of games. There's a content creator called Battle Nonsense who's done a great breakdown of this feature, and his video goes into way more detail than I could ever expand on. So if you want to learn more about this, go and check him out. Just a note though, This function will only work in DX9 and 11 games, as in DX12 and Vulkan games, the game decides when to queue a frame, and the Nvidia drivers have no control over that. Thankfully, in Battlefield we have an in-game setting we can choose. In reality, this setting will help you most if you're GPU restricted, i.e. your GPU is the weak link, so to speak. BF5 is very CPU heavy for the majority of us, but lots of people have different setups. So if you're getting around 60 to 100 FPS, you could enable the low latency mode to get a mouse feeling as though you were getting higher frames. It may be perceptible to you, for others maybe not, but give it a go and see how it feels. Jumping into BF5 real quick though, we can take a look at a setting here called Future Frame Rendering. This is similar to what we just looked at in the Nvidia control panel. When we set it to on, the game will put future frames in the buffer ready, increasing the smoothness of the game. But when you set it off, the game will respond more quickly to the frames, making the input much quicker and feeling more responsive. This can reduce your frame rate though, so if you're suffering for frames, you will probably want to leave this on. When it comes to DirectX 12 versus 11, I would say from what I've seen online, for the most part, people are experiencing better frames on DirectX 12 right now, but it's on a case-by-case basis, so you may want to try out DX11 if you haven't. I've personally been using 12 for some time, and I felt that it does give me better performance overall than 11. When I run BF5, I also use a program called Intelligent Standby List Cleaner. Bit of a mouthful, I know. First of all, this is a legit program made by programmer Vagnard, who's also responsible for Display Driver Uninstaller that a lot of people use every day. Now, this program fixes a problem with the way that memory is dealt with by Windows 10, especially after the recent Creator update. It works by regularly clearing the standby memory list when it's running in the background. You should see that free memory is increased more often when the program is running, and in theory, it should help people who experience stutters. Just to be clear though, this program isn't going to give you an FPS boost, but it should help out with the stutters. It looks complicated, but it isn't. You just load it up, the average user doesn't need to change any settings, and you just hit start on the program if it's not already pressed. And then you leave it running in the background and it does the rest for you. I found that it actually reduces stuttering quite a lot. If you want to download it, head over to the Vagnarsoft website and give it a download. It'll all be safe. Just make sure that you download it from the official website and not a third-party one to be on the safe side, and I'll leave the link in the description below. Lastly, it's worth remembering that sometimes, especially after an update, BF5 can run quite poorly as the maps load, especially when you go into new areas. This is apparently due to the game building the shaders again, so bear with it and it should settle down after you've been to most areas of the map. Another tip is that I tend to turn most of my assignments off these days, as I experience more stutters when they're on and they're being completed or finished. Weekly assignments like the Tides of War weapon assignments unfortunately can't be disabled even if you wanted them to, but the general weapon assignments can be. If you're not experiencing any stutters with the assignments, then feel free to leave them on. If none of that helps, well, you can always try the Hail Mary approach, where you just put all your settings on low, turn everything off, and go full potato mode, which I have to admit I like to do every now and again, because I just feel like in terms of visibility and smoothness, this is where you get the best experience on PC, but it looks like trash, so there's a bit of a toss-up there. Overall, my game I think is running a lot better recently than it has, and I think that's down to a mixture of a game update released by DICE, but also some of the steps that I've taken, and I hope that at least some of these can help anyone who's experiencing similar issues with their game. But remember, if you're not comfortable changing anything on your PC, then please don't. Taking these steps though, for me, they shouldn't be necessary, but since I've done all this stuff, the game just feels so much smoother and more fun, more consistent to play. It makes me wonder, why has this happened with BF5 when BF1, for me personally, it just ran flawlessly. But that was on older graphics hardware, that was on the 10 series of cards, so I wonder if it's got something to do with the RTX cards or maybe the latest AMD, we just don't know. Ultimately, I hope that DICE and Nvidia and AMD can team up in some way and look at this and figure out why it's happening, because it's a well-documented problem. Plenty of PC users have this, and so far there's not been a total fix for it, so it could be a really difficult one to solve. I'm confident though that eventually it will be solved. And that's all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you know someone who's having problems, maybe share it. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.